At my sister's lavish birthday party, someone smashed a champagne bottle against my head because I refused to hand over the $450,000 condo I live in. I walked out bleeding. But I didn't walk away. I came back with the deed to their house. If you've ever felt like the quiet one in your family, the one they thought would never fight back, this story will show you what happens when you finally say enough. The champagne flute felt cold in Elena Hayes's hand, not because it was chilled, but because she didn't want it. She held it out of courtesy, like she did everything tonight. Courtesy she thought was a thin veil people wore to conceal indifference. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light, refracted through towering crystal chandeliers. Laughter clinked like glass, and the scent of cedar wax and French perfume mingled in the air. Elena stood at the edge of it all, watching the curated elegance swirl around her, a silent observer of a play she had no lines in. Her navy dress, practical and years old, hung slightly loose on her shoulders. Not that anyone noticed. They were too busy admiring Margot Hayes, the woman of the hour, her sister turning 50. Margot stood at the center of the room like a monarch, surrounded by people who knew her from boardrooms, charity galas, and front-page society spreads. Her dress shimmered like molten gold, and her laughter, perfectly timed, reverberated off the marble walls of the Highland estate. Elena tried to smile, tried to be grateful she was invited at all. But as the ice cubes in her untouched drink melted, so too did any illusion that she belonged here. She wasn't the estranged sister. No, worse. She was the tolerated one, the obligation invite. Elena, a voice behind her, cooed, sugar-laced with formality. She turned to see Iris gliding toward her, wrapped in a slate-gray sheath dress, and diamonds Elena suspected were once her mother's. Technically, her Aunt Iris had stepped into the maternal role after their mother passed, though Elena never asked her to. "I didn't think you'd come," Iris said gently, touching Elena's arm as though that made it a welcome. "I wasn't going to," Elena replied evenly. "But I figured 50 only comes once." Iris offered a tight smile. "Well, we're glad you did, Margot especially." In fact, she leaned in slightly, eyes glinting. "We were hoping to speak with you about something." Before Elena could ask, she spotted Margot approaching from across the room, her walk measured, confident, and utterly controlled. Margot greeted, arms outstretched, but never touching. "You look... well." "Thanks," Elena said, though she didn't believe it. Margot gestured toward a quiet corner of the ballroom away from the main crowd. "Come, let's catch up." She followed them past a table adorned with imported cheeses and champagne towers, past waiters in white gloves and guests who didn't even glance her way. They reached a quieter alcove near the fireplace, unlit, ornamental. "We wanted to speak to you about your Midtown condo." Margot began, voice even almost kind. Elena's fingers stiffened around the stem of her glass. "You know how much time I've been spending downtown?" Margot continued. "It just doesn't make sense for the family to have property sitting idle." "It's not idle," Elena said coolly. "I live there." "Yes, of course," Iris interjected gently. "But imagine how much more useful it could be if Margot had access. She has meetings, events it would serve the Hayes name well." Elena let out a soft breath, slow and deliberate. "So this is why I was invited." Margot blinked, her smile tight. "It's a simple request, really. You've never been much for the spotlight. Let someone else, someone with visibility, put the asset to good use." Elena's voice was low but sharp. "It's not an asset. It's my home." Silence pulsed for a beat too long. Then, as if summoned by tension itself, Walter appeared beside them. Always too close to Margot. Always wearing a suit. A little too sharp, a smile, a little too smooth. "You're being difficult," he said, voice soft, but the threat beneath unmistakable. Before Elena could respond, his hand moved in a blur. The champagne bottle cracked against her temple with a shattering sound that silenced everything. The pain was sudden and bright. The glass exploded. The liquid spilled like a second skin down her face and dress. She staggered backward, her hand flying to her head. It came back red. Around her, no one moved. No one screamed. No one stepped forward. Even Margot only stood there watching, expression unreadable. Iris opened her mouth, but no words came out. Elena straightened, wobbling slightly, and looked at each of them in turn. Her vision blurred at the edges, but her voice remained steady. "Thanks for the party." And she walked away. The crowd parted for her like mist. Blood trickled past her ear down her neck and left a trail of red on the ivory marble. Each step echoed louder than the music. No one stopped her. No one called her name. Only the chandeliers witnessed her exit, casting fractured light onto a fractured woman. Outside, the wind kissed her face, cool, clean, real. She stepped into the night, head pounding, but heart impossibly clear. This time she wouldn't shrink. This time she would not be the quiet one. Not anymore. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the chaos of the city. Elena leaned against it for a moment, her forehead resting against the cool wood. She could still feel the champagne drying on her scalp, sticky against her hairline, mingled with the slow burn of blood crusting over. She hadn't gone to the hospital. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. But because something inside her had shifted the moment Walter struck her. It wasn't pain that drove her home. It was clarity. She shrugged off her coat and dropped her heels by the door, padding barefoot across the hardwood floor of her apartment. Her midtown condo wasn't luxurious, but it was hers. Neutral-toned walls, shelves packed with case files and books, a coffee table scattered with yellowed legal pads and half-drunk mugs. Quiet, anchored, real. Elena headed straight for the dining table where she kept her important documents. She didn't wash the blood off yet. Her fingers were still trembling, not from fear, but from something closer to fury. Cold and focused. She sat down, flipped on the desk lamp, and began going through her property file. The deed to her condo was there, dated 5 years ago when she had purchased the place after her divorce. She'd signed the papers in a rush between quarterly audits, but she remembered the pen, the embossed folder, the notary who wore too much cologne. Now, as her eyes skimmed the deed, something caught her. The address. Her building was 5620 Main Street. The deed read 5608. She blinked, leaned in, read it again. 5608. A small detail, a nearly invisible error if it was an error. But nothing about the Hayes family happened by mistake. Elena flipped to the next page, a notarized statement. The date stamped on it was 2 days after the signature. But she hadn't been in town that week. She remembered clearly she'd been in Chicago training a new compliance team. She grabbed a pen and circled the date. Next, the signature itself. It was hers, technically. The scrawl of her name matched the quick, looping cursive she used when signing off on dense audit approvals. But it looked copied, repeated, like someone had practiced it. Her pulse quickened. Her breath slowed. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was manipulation. Her fingers grazed the edge of the silver pocket watch on the table, her father's. She hadn't even realized she'd brought it out of the drawer. The cool metal felt grounding familiar. She opened it with a soft click. The hands ticked steadily, a rhythm older than her grief. Walter Hayes. Her father had given her the watch on her 30th birthday. You may not inherit their charm, he'd told her, but you got the one thing none of them can fake, your compass. She swallowed. The room was quiet, except for the ticking. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, she heard his voice again. Never give away what you know is right, just because someone else shares your last name. She opened her eyes. Enough was enough. Elena reached for the drawer in her side cabinet and pulled out an old business card, Hudson Raines, attorney at law. The gold foil lettering was slightly faded, the corners curled. He was her father's most trusted legal advisor and a man who never minced words. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number. Each ring sounded like a drumbeat in her chest. Hudson Raines speaking. His voice was exactly as she remembered gravel and steel wrapped in Southern courtesy. Hudson. It's Elena. Elena Hayes. A pause. Well, I'll be damned, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I haven't heard that name in... What? 5, 6 years, 7? Elena corrected quietly. Since Dad passed. Time flies, he said a little softer. What's got you calling me sugar? She glanced back at the documents spread across the table like puzzle pieces. I think I've got a problem, a legal one. Another pause. Then his voice turned serious. Talk to me. I'm looking at the deed for my condo. The address is wrong. There's a notary stamp I don't remember. And a signature dated when I wasn't even in the state. Hudson let out a low whistle. Sounds like someone's been clever. Or stupid. Both are dangerous. I think someone's trying to erase me from ownership. He didn't answer right away. Then, you still at that Midtown address? Yes, I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't move anything. Don't sign anything. And don't talk to them, not until we know exactly what they've done. Elena nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Thank you. No thanks yet, Hudson said, gruff but warm. Just buckle up. If they're pulling stunts like this, it means they're running out of options, and people like Margot don't handle desperation well. When the call ended, Elena sat in silence. The ticking of the watch continued calm and relentless. She stood up, poured herself a glass of water, and finally washed the dried blood from her hair. As the water ran red down the drain, something settled in her chest. Not fear, not pain. Something steadier, heavier. Resolve. The bell over the door jingled as Elena stepped into Tommy's diner. It smelled like burnt coffee, warm syrup and memories. Nothing had changed. Red vinyl booths lined the walls worn at the corners. Chrome fixtures glinted dully under the morning light. The old jukebox still sat silent in the corner, unplugged for at least a decade. It was the kind of place untouched by time and perhaps protected by it. Hudson Raines was already seated at the back booth, exactly where she remembered him sitting with her father years ago. He wore a navy blazer over a light blue shirt, sleeves rolled casually to his forearms. A mug of black coffee steamed between his hands. Elena Hayes, he said, standing just enough to greet her with a warm, firm handshake. I half expected you'd change your mind. I almost did, she admitted, sliding into the booth opposite him. But then I remembered what Dad used to say, never back down from a table if the cards are in your favor. Hudson chuckled. Walter had a way of turning poker metaphors into parenting. He signaled the waitress with a nod, black coffee, no sugar, the usual. She brought it without a word. This place had seen too many Hayes men to ask questions now. Hudson reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. It looked old but intact, carefully kept. He slid it across the table. Recognize this. Elena opened the folder. Her name stared back at her in thick, typewritten font. Elena Marie Hayes, primary beneficiary. Hayes Family Trust, 1987. Her throat tightened. I thought this was... lost. Hudson finished. Not quite. Your father gave me a copy for safekeeping back when Margot started making noise about expanding her dynasty. He always suspected this day would come. She ran her fingers along the edge of the page, pausing at the signature. Her father's name was scrawled in bold, familiar ink at the bottom. And the house, she asked. Legally, Hudson said, tapping the top corner. Still yours. The Highland property was meant to pass directly to you upon Walter's death. But the deed transfer was never properly filed. Someone dragged their feet or wanted you to think it wasn't yours. She blinked. So, for all these years, they've been living in a house they don't own, Hudson said. On paper, they're squatters with a very good tailor. The weight of it pressed down on her 30 years of family tension-cold shoulders, erased invitations and whispered inheritance deals. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a quiet, coordinated omission. Why didn't anyone tell me she asked more to herself than to him? Hudson shrugged. Maybe because you wouldn't have demanded it. That was your father's gamble and his faith. He trusted you to come for it when it mattered. Elena closed the folder gently as if it were a fragile relic. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the silver pocket watch. Hudson raised his eyebrows, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. Still ticking, she opened it with a quiet click. The second hand swept in smooth, measured motion, unhurried. Steady. He gave it to me on my 30th, she said. Said it belonged to his father before him. Called it the keeper of our timing. Hudson sipped his coffee. Fitting. Walter always said you had the strongest instinct for right and wrong. Said it scared him sometimes how unwavering you were. He never told me that. Well, Hudson said eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses he figured you didn't need to be told something you already lived by. Elena stared at the watch. Time isn't something you win, she thought. It's something you honor. She snapped it shut. So what happens next? Hudson leaned back, hands folded. We file a motion to declare rightful ownership. You'll get a copy of the trust certified and we'll cross-reference the Highland deed records. Then we prepare a quiet eviction notice, formal legal no drama if we can help it. And if they fight back? Hudson smirked. Then we let them. The diner grew quiet for a moment. The clink of forks, the hum of a ceiling fan, the slow drip of coffee into an overused pot. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, indifferent to the storm that had begun to brew in Elena's life. She looked up from the watch and met Hudson's gaze. I'm not doing this for revenge, she said softly. I know. I'm doing it because it's mine. And because I'm tired of apologizing for existing. Hudson nodded. Good. Then let's get started. The iron gates of Highland creaked open with an unnerving groan, as if the estate itself resented her return. Elena stepped out of the car with the manila folder tucked tightly under her arm. The sky overhead was steel gray, and a wind swept past the grand driveway, scattering dry magnolia leaves across the stone path like forgotten secrets. The mansion loomed before her, elegant, towering, but hollow now. She remembered it differently when her father still walked those halls, when his voice echoed through the atrium with gentle authority. Back when the walls held warmth instead of performance. She rang the bell only once. The door opened almost instantly. Elena Iris greeted her voice lined with false warmth. She wore a pearl gray dress, hair pinned neatly, makeup exact. Her smile was brittle. We were just about to have tea. Come in. Elena stepped inside. The air smelled of lemon polish and tension. Everything gleamed with curated perfection. Margot's waiting in the parlor, Iris added, leading her down the hallway with soft, calculated steps. There are just a few formalities to finalize. Elena followed silently, her fingers brushing against the edges of the folder in her arms. She felt the weight of it, of everything it meant. Her heels tapped softly against the marble, echoing like a countdown. Inside the parlor, Margot sat poised on a cream-colored settee, a folder already placed on the lacquered coffee table in front of her. Walter stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Elena, Margot said, with a practiced smile, gesturing to the armchair across from her. We're so glad you came. This won't take long. Elena didn't sit. Margot's smile thinned. Just a few signatures. Legal housekeeping, really. I was curious, Elena said quietly, why you'd want me to sign something when I never agreed to give anything up. Margot exchanged a quick glance with Iris. It's just a transfer of usage rights, Iris offered. The property deed is complex. We thought streamlining things might help family to family. Elena set her folder down on the table deliberately. I brought my own documents. Margot's brows furrowed. Elena flipped open the folder with steady hands. The trust agreement, the Highland deed, Walter Hayes's signature, Hudson's notes. She pushed it across the table. This house, Elena said evenly, was never legally transferred after Dad's death. According to the Hayes Family Trust dated 1987, I am the sole legal heir to this property. The room went still. Margot stared at the documents, her hand frozen mid-reach. Iris let out a small, disbelieving laugh. That's absurd. It's filed, certified, verified by a notary, Elena replied. Hudson Raines is my legal counsel. Walter shifted near the fireplace but said nothing. Elena turned her gaze on him. You knew, didn't you? That's why you never pushed me too far. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Margot's composure cracked at the edges. You're weaponizing paperwork. That's not family. No, Elena said softly. What you did at your birthday party, that wasn't family. The silence after those words felt deeper than anger. Iris leaned forward, her voice low, sharp. Do you think this makes you noble, dragging us into legal hell for what? A house. Elena's hands stayed folded, her voice calm. I'm not reclaiming this because I'm angry. I'm reclaiming it because my father trusted me to do what's right. And I'm done letting his memory be used to justify theft wrapped in silk. She turned to Margot now, her expression unreadable. You always said I wasn't built for this, that I was too quiet, too removed. But it turns out silence only protects the ones who are already holding the knife. Margot stood, hands clenched at her sides. You're making a mistake. No, Elena said. I'm correcting one. Walter finally spoke, voice low. And what now? I'll have my legal team reach out with next steps. You'll have time to vacate. This doesn't have to be ugly. Iris scoffed. It already is. Elena reached for her folder, tucking it back under her arm. Then you shouldn't have made it so. She turned toward the door, her steps unhurried. No one tried to stop her. As she reached the entryway, she paused, her hand on the polished brass handle. She didn't turn back, but her voice carried through the house like a verdict. I'm not here to destroy the family. I'm here to stop pretending I was never part of it. And with that, she stepped out into the wind. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud, and Elena breathed in the chill of approaching rain. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the weight of Highland on her shoulders. She was carrying the truth, and it was lighter than she expected. Elena stood in Hudson's office, the morning light stretching long shadows across shelves lined with law books and brass-framed degrees. Her fingers were still smudged with printer ink, her mind laser-sharp. Across the desk, Hudson finished reviewing the final affidavit and nodded. It's all here, he said. Clean, verifiable, and dangerous. The documents laid out before them weren't just about Highland anymore. This was larger, messier. The trust had been the door, but what they'd found inside Hayes Capital Holdings was the rot. Using internal bank records, email threads, and signed ledgers, Hudson had traced through public filings they'd uncovered 6 years of slow siphoning money funneled from the company's charitable subsidiaries into personal shell accounts. 10,000 here, 50,000 there, spread wide enough to hide but not deep enough to erase. At the center, Margot Hayes and Walter Brennan. Elena stared down at the spreadsheets. Every number was an insult. Every dollar a betrayal. Not just of shareholders or clients, but of her father's name, his company, his principles. Hudson slid a manila envelope across the desk. We filed this today. Elena exhaled slowly. And then we sit back and watch the tower shake. By the end of the week, the story had broken. Local business papers were first. Then the national wires picked it up. Allegations of embezzlement surface within Hayes Capital. Talk shows speculated. Analysts dissected quarterly reports with newfound scrutiny. The company's name, once synonymous with stability, now flickered beneath headlines marked with words like fraud, misconduct, and ethical collapse. Elena watched it all unfold from her apartment, her phone lighting up with notifications, missed calls, and interview requests. She ignored most of them. Then came the footage. A news clip showed Margot exiting a downtown building in a navy blue pantsuit and oversized sunglasses. A line of reporters swarmed her. Ms. Hayes. Is it true funds were diverted from the Hayes Foundation? Do you have any response to your sister's legal claims? She didn't stop walking. She didn't speak. Her lips pursed. Her chin lifted a little higher, like she could outrun the story if she simply refused to look back. Later that evening, Walter appeared outside the courthouse, flanked by 2 attorneys, his tie askew, his hands tucked tight into his coat pockets. No comment at this time, one lawyer said. We are cooperating fully with investigators. They always said that. Hudson forwarded her an email from a journalist at the Houston Chronicle. We'd love a statement from Ms. Hayes if she's willing. For hours, Elena stared at the blinking cursor in her document draft. What did you say when the walls fell down? What did you say when the family you defended in silence tried to bury you? She opened the silver pocket watch and let it tick in her palm while the words came. I didn't tear apart a family. I simply stopped being the only one trying to hold it together. I won't apologize for defending what's rightfully mine, my home, my name, my father's legacy. I believe in accountability even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. The truth isn't cruel. Silence is. She hit send. The statement ran online and in print, and, to her surprise, it resonated. The narrative began to shift. Commenters called her brave. Editorials praised her resolve. Survivors of similar family betrayals reached out through email messages, handwritten letters. One read, "Thank you for saying what so many of us never got the chance to." But not everyone was kind. Some called her opportunistic, cold. A woman scorned. She read every word, and still she slept easier than she had in years, because this time she wasn't watching injustice from the corner of a ballroom. She was naming it, documenting it, challenging it. She was not the quiet one anymore. One morning, while pouring coffee in her kitchen, Elena caught her own reflection in the window hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear. Her father's watch sat on the counter beside the cream and sugar ticking faintly like a second heartbeat. She thought of him often now. Not just the way he looked, but the way he paused before answering questions, the way he refused to shout even when others raised their voices. His certainty had never been loud. It had been anchored. That was the legacy they never understood. Not the real estate, not the board seats, not the marble floors. It was that the steadiness to say no when silence would have been easier. She reached for the watch, snapped it shut, and whispered, "You were right, Dad. I just needed time to prove it." The house no longer felt like it belonged to ghosts. When the final court order came through, Elena returned to Highland, not with vengeance in her chest, but blueprints in her hand. It was raining that morning. Not violently, just a steady drizzle that softened the edges of the world. The iron gates groaned as they opened for her. No one stood inside to greet her. The halls were silent, the chandeliers dim. The air carried no perfume, only dust. She paused in the foyer, letting her eyes travel over the marble floors, the grand staircase, the crown molding above her. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her mind. It's just wood and stone until you fill it with people who matter. This time, she would. She walked through the rooms slowly, room by room, finger trailing along wainscoting and worn banisters. Every surface told a story, some proud, some poisoned, but none irreversible. She'd made her decision. Highland would become a community trust center, a place where those who had been overlooked, unheard, and unseen could gather, heal, and belong. The mansion that once stood as a monument to exclusion would now be one of inclusion. When she announced it to the press, the headlines came fast. Former Hayes estate to become Highland Community Trust, led by Elena Hayes. From scandal to service. The house that will welcome everyone. But Elena didn't do it for the coverage. She did it for the ones who never even made it to the front door. By noon, the first crew arrived. Contractors, electricians, and volunteers from the neighborhood. Many of them remembered the house only from the outside. a place you walked past but never into. Now they wore work gloves and tool belts, laughter and purpose in their voices. Elena rolled up her sleeves and joined them. The grand dining room, once the stage for Margot's parties and Walter's polished toasts, would become the Walter Hayes Community Hall, named not for the man who had stolen, but for the man who had quietly given. Her father. The room would host town meetings, free skill-building workshops, and local nonprofit events. The long dining table was replaced with foldable workspaces. The chandelier dimmed to give way to natural light. The walls repainted warm and welcoming. Next came the study, which had once held rows of leather-bound books. No one read a mahogany desk, no one worked at. Elena remembered the smell of cigar smoke, the way her father would sit late at night scribbling in the margins of financial reports with a red pen. It would now become the Kinley Library, named after Mrs. Ruth Kinley, her father's longtime secretary, and a quiet force of organization and ethics behind every good decision he made. Ruth, now in her 70s, cried when Elena told her. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. "You do," Elena said. "You always have." The library shelves were built with reclaimed wood, and neighbors donated books. Children's readers, legal guides, immigration pamphlets, and memoirs. In the center stood a reading circle made of old church pews and mismatched armchairs. None of it matched. And that was the point. In the East Wing, once a guest suite reserved for corporate allies and backroom deals, Elena oversaw the creation of a women's respite room, a warm private space for women escaping domestic abuse or in need of transitional shelter. They installed new locks, repainted with soft earth tones, filled drawers with toiletries, clothing, and journals. On the door, she had a small plaque mounted. For those who needed a door, no one ever gave them. Every evening when the crews packed up and the noise stilled, Elena would walk the halls with a cup of tea and her father's watch in her palm. She didn't wear it. She held it. Let it tick against her skin like a second pulse. Sometimes she'd pause in the middle of the hallway and just breathe deep, slow, anchoring herself in the sound of hammers, fading of conversation, growing of walls, shedding their old lives for something new. And it wasn't just her. The community showed up. People she hadn't seen since childhood. The grocery clerk who'd watched her grow up. A high school janitor who remembered her father handing him an envelope one winter when his heater broke. A single mom who said her scholarship years ago came from a silent donor at Hayes Capital. They brought paint books, casseroles, and stories. No one asked what took her so long. They only asked how they could help now. That Elena thought was what rebuilding really meant. Not the bricks, not the polish, but the hands that showed up and said, "Let's build something that wasn't there before." As the week ended, she stood in what used to be the grand ballroom, now a shared space with nothing more than sunlight, folding chairs, and hope. She took the watch out of her pocket, set it on a windowsill, and let it tick into the dust-kissed light. Her father had once told her that homes weren't built from foundation up. They were built from purpose out. Now Highland finally had one. The paint was dry. The scaffolding had come down. The tools had been packed away, the last screws tightened. Highland no longer felt like an echo chamber of the past it breathed now. But Elena hadn't expected the house to speak back. The first story came from a volunteer laying carpet tiles in the library. He was tall, wiry, and quiet. Maybe mid-20s, wearing a university sweatshirt and work boots a size too big. When Elena offered him water, he looked up and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" She paused, tilting her head. "Name's Noah." The name was faintly familiar. "I was 11 when your father covered my dental bill. My mom didn't have insurance. We were new in town. I never knew who paid until my mother found a note stuffed into a manila envelope. It just said, 'Take care of him. He deserves to smile without pain.' It was signed W.H. Elena blinked. "He never told me." Noah smiled softly. "He didn't tell anyone. That's why I came back. I'm studying library science now. If you'll have me, I'd like to run this place. The Kinley Library." Her answer was immediate. "We'd be lucky to have you." He went back to work. Elena watched him for a long moment, heart swelling with something more complex than pride inheritance in its truest form. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Ruth Kinley arrived. She walked with a cane, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a soft blue scarf. Elena greeted her at the door and guided her through the finished rooms, narrating each transformation with quiet reverence. When they reached the library bearing her name, Ruth stopped, pressed a hand to her chest, and sat slowly on one of the benches. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I did," Elena replied. "You kept him steady through some of his hardest years. You were his compass." Ruth smiled faintly, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "I want to give you something," she said. Inside was another silver pocket watch. Elena gasped. "It's not his," Ruth explained. "It's a match. He gave it to me in 1985. I'd stayed late 3 nights in a row helping him untangle some very messy tax records. He never said thank you in words. Just left this on my desk with a note. Time is borrowed, but trust is earned." Elena held the watch in both hands. The engraving on the back was worn but legible. "W.H. I thought it was lost," she whispered. Ruth smiled. "No, just waiting." Word spread. Not just about the renovations, but about who Walter Hayes had really been. And what his daughter was choosing to do with the inheritance no one expected her to claim. A woman named Clarice came to the front desk one morning with a stack of books and a trembling voice. She was in her 60s, hair tied back in a red ribbon, her nails bitten short. "My brother was in prison," she said. "Your father used to send me grocery cards every Thanksgiving. They were anonymous, but I knew. I just knew." Another man, a war veteran, brought a faded photo of himself, standing beside Walter at a local job fair. He offered me a position at the warehouse. I didn't think I was worth hiring anymore. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You stood for something. Come stand with us." Story by story they arrived, some written in shaking cursive, some whispered in hallways, some left as notes slipped under the door of the newly named Walter Hayes Community Hall. Each one was a thread, quiet, humble, almost invisible. Together they formed something unbreakable. Elena kept them all in a leather-bound journal she tucked away in the library office. Her father's words, their memories, proof of a life that had meant more than marble floors and financial legacies. One evening, Elena stood at the far end of the West Wing, her hand resting on the cool wood of the newly installed railing. She looked down the long corridor, sunlight slanting through the windows, cutting across the grain of fresh-painted walls. She realized something then. The house wasn't her father's legacy. The people walking through it were. Every person who had stepped forward with a story. Every person who now stepped inside because the door was open. Every quiet voice that no longer had to ask permission to be heard. She took both watches, the one she carried and the one Ruth gave her, and placed them side by side on her desk, ticking together. Time, she realized, wasn't something you passed down in objects. It was something you gifted in presence. And finally, she was present. The morning sun bathed the Highland mansion in soft gold, warming the newly painted facade, and the blooming rows of lavender lining the walkways. A long ribbon, white, not red, stretched across the front doors, fluttering gently in the early breeze. Guests gathered in clusters across the courtyard, neighbors, community leaders, former volunteers, teachers, mothers with children, small business owners. Some wore work gloves from the days they'd helped strip wallpaper and sand old beams. Others wore Sunday best, their hands holding folded programs printed with the Highland Community Trust crest. At the center of it all stood Elena. She wore a deep green coat and a quiet, unreadable expression. Her father's watch rested in her pocket, its familiar weight grounding her as she stood on the steps of a home that had once belonged to others in name, but now belonged to everyone in purpose. Hudson stepped up beside her. He was clean-shaven for once in a suit that looked like it hadn't seen daylight since her father's funeral. He didn't speak immediately, just handed her a small envelope yellowed slightly at the corners. Her name was written across the front in her father's hand. Elena's heart stilled. "He gave it to me just before he passed," Hudson said quietly. "Told me to hold on to it until you stepped into your own." Elena looked down at the letter. The ink was faded but clear. She didn't open it yet, not until she had done what he raised her to do. A hush fell over the courtyard as Hudson stepped to the mic and welcomed everyone. His speech was brief and elegant, filled with gratitude and names. But when he turned to Elena and gestured for her to take the stage, the stillness grew. She walked slowly to the podium, hands firm on either side of the wood. She glanced over the crowd, not a sea of strangers, but a living, breathing testament to what this house had become. She didn't read from notes. Her voice didn't tremble. "I grew up believing that love meant silence," Elena began. "That being the quiet one in the room was a kind of strength. That if I just stayed small enough, long enough, eventually someone would make room for me." She paused, letting the words settle. "But silence isn't love. Silence is what keeps the wrong people powerful. And I learned that the hard way." A ripple moved through the audience, some nods, some soft exhales. "This building once belonged to people who taught me that appearances mattered more than truth. That a name was more valuable than a voice. That legacy was something you inherited, not something you built." She took a breath. They were wrong. Her gaze drifted toward the library windows where Noah stood inside shelving books, where Mrs. Kinley sat quietly in the front row with tears in her eyes, where a woman Elena didn't even know was helping a child lace up shoes in the newly built women's respite wing. "This isn't a monument to wealth," she said. "This is a promise to community, to recovery, to everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. The Highland Community Trust exists because we all deserve a door that opens." The applause came slowly at first, then grew. Thunderous, sustained. Elena stepped back from the podium, hands trembling slightly now, not from nerves, but from the intensity of holding so much history in her chest, and finally letting it breathe. She returned to her seat, and only then did she open the letter. Inside, her father's handwriting covered a single sheet. "Elena, by now I know the silence has grown louder. I know what you've been left out of, and I know that my absence won't make that easier. But listen to me clearly, and with both feet on the ground, you will be underestimated. You will be told you are too soft, too slow, too quiet to lead. And sometimes even by family you will be made to feel like the afterthought. But you are not an afterthought. You are the anchor, the one who listens before speaking, the one who notices what others pretend not to see, the one who holds the line long after others abandon it. The world needs fewer performers and more compasses. You are mine. And someday when it's time you'll lead, not because you want power, but because you know where true north is. Keep the watch, keep the house. But most of all, keep yourself. Love you always. Dad." Elena folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her chest. The tears came not fast or broken, but warm and full and earned. Not grief, not even sorrow. Just clarity. She had never needed permission. She had needed to remember that her father's faith in her was never about volume. It was about vision. And now, standing before a house that had once excluded her, Elena felt the hum of something sacred in her bones. She had arrived not to inherit, but to lead, exactly as he knew she would. The light inside the Highland Community Trust was different now. Not just brighter, but alive. It filtered through the windows in soft golden beams, warming the wooden floors and dancing across shelves, walls, and shoulders. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallways, layered with conversation, the hum of new beginnings. Elena stood near the entrance, her coat draped over her arm, her father's silver pocket watch no longer in her pocket, but in the glass display case by the main doors. She'd placed it there that morning quietly before anyone else arrived. It sat on a small velvet cushion beneath crystal-clear glass. The chain was coiled in a loose spiral, the face polished to a pristine silver sheen. Its hands ticked steadily, measuring time, the way her father had lived quietly, precisely, without apology. Beneath the watch, a small plaque read, "A New Beginning," in memory of what was and what will be. A little girl no older than 5 approached the case, her tiny hand pressed gently to the glass. Her eyes were wide the way children look at something they don't quite understand but instinctively know is important. Her mother knelt beside her, pointing softly. That belonged to the man who made this place possible. The girl turned her head. "Did he build it?" "No," her mother said with a smile. "But he raised someone who did." Elena watched them from a few feet away, her heart tugging. The child turned and saw her. They shared a quiet look. No words. Just recognition, the kind that crosses generations, the kind that says this place is safe. Elena smiled. The girl waved. In the back garden, volunteers were kneeling in the soil, planting rows of lavender. The scent carried in the breeze, familiar and grounding. It had been Margot's idea once, to plant lavender to impress the donors. But these weren't donors. These were neighbors, friends. People who had once been left outside the gates, now digging roots into the very soil that had once shut them out. Elena walked toward the garden slowly, hands in her pockets, her boots soft against the gravel. She passed a group of teenagers painting a mural along the back wall, an abstract blend of colors, names, and phrases. One in bold lettering read, "We still have each other." She stopped for a moment and just let it settle. It wasn't a declaration of resilience against tragedy. It was a celebration of what remained after the dust cleared. She looked back at the house, the new library filled with books and warm lamps and whispered dreams, the community hall where job seekers and single parents and newly arrived immigrants now gathered with coffee and purpose. The respite wing already holding space for women who needed somewhere quiet to start again. Each space had a name, but more importantly, each space had people. People who saw her. Not as the quiet sister, not as the outcast, not even as the owner, but as one of them. That was the gift she hadn't expected, the soft, steady truth that she didn't need to belong to a family that had rejected her to feel like she belonged. She belonged to this, to everyone who showed up with open hands and full hearts, to every face without a name who still deserved to be remembered, to every person who needed a second chance to stand. She belonged, finally, to herself. Later that afternoon, Elena returned inside and walked the halls with Hudson. He moved slower these days, but his eyes were still sharp and his smile just as irreverent. "You did good," he said, nodding as they passed the mural. "No," she corrected, her voice quiet. "We did." They stood in the doorway of the community hall, watching as chairs were rearranged for a storytelling night. Children scribbled in coloring books near the front. An elder from the neighborhood rehearsed a poem in the corner. Elena leaned against the frame. "You think he'd be proud?" she asked. Hudson didn't hesitate. "I think he already was." As the sun began to set, Elena stepped outside alone. She stood on the front steps, the sky fading to amber and rose. The courtyard was full, people coming and going, laughing, carrying bags of food, pushing strollers, holding each other. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She felt like she was walking into it. Into something bigger than legacy, bigger than redemption, bigger than family names written in black ink on cream-colored paper. She was walking into a life she had built brick by brick, room by room, not to reclaim what had been taken, but to offer what had never been given. A place where people didn't have to knock twice to be let in. She placed her hand over her heart. The watch might sit behind glass now, but its rhythm lived on in the movement, the breath, the soft murmur of voices that now filled these walls. They had begun again, together, and that was more than enough.